It all began when I bought a house with a beautiful garden, a dream I had worked tirelessly to achieve. But that dream quickly turned into a nightmare when my husband, Tom, and my mother-in-law, Mary, smugly announced that my in-laws would be moving in with us. "They're coming too. If you don't like it, my son will divorce you," Mary declared with a smirk. I knew what this meant. If she moved in, her toxic daughter would follow. They were fully aware of my objections, but didn't care. The thought of enduring their constant meddling and torment in my new home made my stomach churn. "I don't want to live with you," I protested firmly. "What? Know your place," Mary snapped back, her eyes narrowing. With an air of triumph, she produced divorce papers already signed by Tom. Their smugness confirmed it had been their plan all along, to force me out and secure the house for themselves. The betrayal stung, but more than anything, I felt disgusted by their greed. I couldn't help but laugh under my breath, mistaking my reaction for nervousness. Mary looked pleased. I quietly signed the papers, packed my belongings, and left the house, determined never to look back at the prison it had become. But their story didn't end there. On the day I moved out, Mary flooded my phone with calls. "Have you figured it out yet?" she demanded, her tone as self-assured as ever. She insisted we meet, thinking she still had control over me. This time, I was ready. I prepared for our confrontation with care, knowing this would be the final chapter in their manipulative saga. "My name is Sarah. I work at an advertising agency. I met my ex-husband, Peter, through Max, a manager at a local newspaper. At 29, feeling pressured and out of options, I reluctantly accepted Max's introduction. Peter was persistent, and after 6 months of dating, I gave in and married him. Looking back, I curse myself for making such a rash decision. It's clear now that my ex-mother-in-law, Hannah, had been scheming from the start. She initially presented herself as kind and gentle, but her true nature emerged as soon as I married Peter. She became a tyrant. "Sarah, didn't I tell you to weed the garden after doing the dishes?" she would bark. Her voice seemed to echo through the house every single day. The exhaustion was suffocating, and I barely had the energy to respond. After our wedding, Peter insisted we live with Hannah. His father had passed away, and she supposedly struggled with a chronic leg injury. Peter pleaded, saying he couldn't abandon his mother, but when we moved in, I discovered her walking around with ease. It quickly became apparent that her injury was just a ruse. "It's a mother-in-law's duty to educate her daughter-in-law," she declared, turning me into her personal servant. Peter offered no support. Every time I suggested moving out, he brushed me off with excuses, never standing up to his mother. "Yeah, Mom can be a bit hot-tempered," he'd say casually, as if that justified her behavior. "Stop smiling and help me, I can't do this alone," I'd cry out, but my words fell on deaf ears. Living with them took a toll on my mental health. The constant demands, belittling comments, and lack of support left me spiraling. Eventually, I was diagnosed with an adjustment disorder. My life revolved around Hannah's endless list of chores: cleaning, cooking, weeding, and even fixing parts of the dilapidated house. "This house is a rental. We're lucky we're getting it cheap," she'd complain. "I want to live in a home that's truly ours, don't you, Peter?" "I do, Mom," Peter replied, "but we can't afford that on my salary." Frustrated by her son's inaction, she directed all her anger at me, treating me like the scapegoat for their problems. When I wasn't at work, she had me running errands, cleaning gutters, and taking her to doctor's appointments. My body ached from the constant workload, and my mind was in shambles. Things only got worse when Peter's sister, Sophia, moved back in after her divorce, bringing her child along. The house, once just suffocating, became unbearable. "Ridiculous, that's just how things work in this house," Hannah scoffed. "Besides, going to such places or having an affair is a sign of a man's strength. A wife should overlook these things with a gracious heart." To them, this warped logic was perfectly reasonable. To me, it was outrageous. Forgive such behavior? Never. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I couldn't keep enduring this madness. It was time to act and end this misery once and for all. Hannah and Sophia showed no mercy, treating me as if I were their personal servant. They lounged around all day, barking orders whenever they felt hungry or annoyed. "Sarah, it's already noon. Why isn't lunch ready? You're so slow, it's infuriating. Why don't you try cooking yourselves for once?" I snapped. "I've been cleaning the garden, shaking out the carpets, and running errands all morning without a single break. Don't you dare talk back. You're the daughter-in-law, so act like one." Their words stung, and while I stayed quiet on the outside, My anger boiled within. I wanted out, a divorce, but it wasn't that simple. My ties to Max, the manager who introduced me to John, complicated matters. Worse, my boss, Arthur, had warned me against causing any drama. Hannah used that to her advantage, trapping me in her web of control. For now, I swallowed my frustration and bided my time. I needed a solid plan to escape this chaos. Eventually, John's infidelity became impossible to ignore. A colleague at another agency provided undeniable proof. Finally, a chance to break free. A month later, during dinner, Sophia casually spread a housing catalog across the table, sparking a heated discussion. "Look at this," she said, waving the glossy pages. "Sarah's been planning to buy a house." "Wait, did you go through my bag? How dare you invade my privacy?" "Be quiet," she shot back. "Oh, it's such a lovely place, a bit rural, but charming." "Sarah," John interrupted, his tone sharp, "why didn't you tell me about this?" I explained I'd already visited the property, a spacious, affordable house with a garden. Hearing this, Hannah and Sophia's interest peaked. "How far along are you in the process? Are you really buying it?" "It's a great deal," Hannah said, feigning enthusiasm. "John, you should go for it. A man needs to think big. I'll even help financially," she added with a sickly sweet smile, her true motives painfully obvious. When I asked whose name would be on the title, John looked irritated. "Obviously, it'll be in my name. I'm the head of this household." "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Does this mean we'll finally have a place of our own?" "Yes," he said firmly. But as they exchanged sly glances, I knew they had other plans. Not long after the house was purchased and I began moving in, Hannah and John dropped a bombshell. "We're moving in with you," they announced smugly. "What? You promised we'd live alone." "We've changed our minds," Hannah declared, "and if you don't like it, I'll have John divorce you." Think about what Arthur would say if that happened. Their manipulation was shameless, and I knew Sophia wouldn't be far behind. My dream house was turning into a nightmare before it even began. "No, absolutely not. I won't live with you," I said, standing my ground. "You clearly don't understand your position," Hannah sneered, producing divorce papers pre-signed by John. Her tone was icy, and her expression gleamed with triumph. "If you won't comply, sign here," she demanded, thrusting the papers at me. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Let's get divorced. I've had enough." "What? Are you serious?" John stammered, caught off guard. "Let her go," Hannah scoffed. "She's useless. You'll find someone better in no time." I signed the papers without a word, packed my belongings, and walked out, leaving them to their schemes. Hannah's smug grin never faltered, oblivious to the trap she'd walked into. Little did she know, I wasn't defeated, I was just getting started. My plan was falling into place perfectly, and it took everything in me not to laugh as I left. I decided it was time to confront them head-on and end this nightmare for good. "Fine, I'll meet you, but just this once," I agreed reluctantly. "Thank you, I owe you for this, but I'll choose the time and place," I added, determined to stay in control. After carefully preparing, I set the meeting at a cafe, ensuring the location was public yet neutral. I deliberately arrived 20 minutes late. When I walked in, Hannah and Sophia were visibly irritated, while John wore his usual smug expression. Predictable. Hannah immediately launched into an attack. "How dare you keep us waiting? Such disrespect." "I don't need a lecture on respect from you," I replied calmly, refusing to rise to the bait. Sophia chimed in, her tone sharp. "So, what's your excuse for dragging us into this mess?" "You'd better watch your tone," Hannah snapped. "We're stuck in that broken-down house because of you. Take some responsibility." I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. "That's on you. You chose to move in, didn't you?" Hannah faltered, realizing she couldn't deny it. They had willingly moved in after claiming their previous home needed renovations. "Enough," I said firmly. "It's my turn to speak. Hannah, I'm suing you for damages. Be prepared." Her eyes widened in shock. "Suing me? For what?" "For mental and emotional abuse," I stated, pulling out a copy of my medical diagnosis. "You caused me to develop an adjustment disorder. This is the proof." I placed the papers on the table, and they all leaned in to read. Hannah's face turned pale. She never expected I'd take such a step. "You had no idea how much harm your words caused, did you?" I cried myself to sleep most nights, feeling physically sick because of your constant harassment. "That's not my fault, you're just weak," she shot back. "A terrible daughter-in-law, through and through, and calling me that is slander," I countered coolly, punishable by up to a year in prison or a fine of $3,000. That's ridiculous, she exclaimed. Is it? I replied, unfazed. Her ignorance of the law was glaring, but I wasn't done. And let's not forget your threats, repeatedly using the idea of divorce to intimidate me. That's extortion, punishable by up to 2 years in prison or a $3,000 fine. John tried to intervene. This is absurd. You're just trying to scare her because she doesn't know the law. I smiled and leaned in, and I have proof. I recorded everything. Their faces frozen in disbelief. I explained that I'd been using my phone's recorder to document their behavior, Hannah's abusive tirades, Sophia's theft, and John's betrayal. All of it was on record. Speaking of Sophia, I continued, turning to her, you've got some explaining to do. What? Me? I didn't do anything, she stammered. Oh, really? Let me remind you. I held up my phone and showed a video of her rifling through my bag. How did you even record that? She asked, panicked. Because after you arrived, my things started disappearing, makeup, jewelry, clothes, even bags. So, I installed a hidden camera. Sophia's face turned ashen. That's an invasion of privacy. Funny, coming from someone who invaded mine. Theft is punishable by up to 10 years in prison or a $5,000 fine. I've already compiled an itemized list of what you stole, complete with values. Sophia was speechless, and for once, so was Hannah. I finally turned to John, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. And then there's you. You were supposed to be my partner, but you sided with them at every turn. That's not true. I just wanted to keep the peace, he protested weakly. Liar. And let's not forget about Emma, I said, watching the blood drain from his face. What? How do you know about her? I have my ways. I also have photos of the two of you entering a hotel together. Would you like to see? Don't, he pleaded, his voice breaking. I stood up, my voice firm. You've all seen the evidence. I'm reporting this to the authorities. Don't contact me again unless it's through a lawyer. Goodbye. I walked out, leaving them stunned and powerless. In the weeks that followed, the truth about John's infidelity and his mistreatment of me spread through his workplace. He lost his job and reputation, while Hannah and Sophia were forced to fend for themselves. Their fractured relationship eventually drove them apart. A year later, John showed up at my workplace, looking disheveled and desperate. I barely recognized you, I remarked coldly. I've been through a lot, he admitted, apologizing profusely. Don't bother, I've moved on, I said firmly. When he begged for another chance, I shut him down. Even if I were single, I wouldn't take you back. I walked away without a second thought, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions. For the first time in years, I felt free, and truly happy.